UseEffect is the hardest and honestly the most misunderstood hook when it comes to React. I mean, every single time that I make a video on UseEffect, specifically when I talk about the dependency array, I get so many comments from so many developers that really shows me just how misunderstood this hook actually is. And here's the thing, you've probably heard that you should be using useEffect as little as possible in your applications, right? That every single time that you're using an effect, you probably don't need it and you should refactor your code to remove it. And while there is definitely some truth to that, you still can't completely get rid of useEffect and just never use it in your application, right? UseEffect was built with a purpose, it has a use case, and the things that useEffect does, no other hook in React can actually do. And so understanding how to use useEffect correctly, right, how to work with the dependency array and make sure that you're following all of the rules when it comes to useEffect is really, really important. Because if you don't, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, you're going to introduce bugs into your application, and you're not going to have a good time. And so in this video, that's what I want to do. I want to show you how to actually correctly use useEffect, how to work with the dependency array, and also show you all the potential ways that you might be using it wrong, and also show you the very real consequences of what happens when you use useEffect incorrectly. So that's what this video is about. Get ready, come with me on this journey, and I promise you, you're going to learn a lot about useEffect. Oh, and if you want to go deeper on useEffect and in other hooks in React and just generally design patterns in React, I'm actually launching a whole course on design patterns in React on my upcoming platform, Code. The platform is coming out very soon, and there's a waitlist for it open right now, which you should join if you're interested. You're going to be able to find it in the description. It's code.ai. Now, with that being said, let's get into the video and let's talk about useEffect in React. All right, let's begin. Let's look at some code and let's talk about useEffect and dependency arrays in React. Now, what I'm really hoping for this video is that after this video, we can finally put this issue to rest because I feel that I've been talking about this a lot and we haven't really gotten anywhere. I really want us to finally understand how to actually use useEffect correctly and also agree upon it and then just put this issue to rest and move on to something that is more important. Like, for example, I don't know, building and shipping features for the actual applications that our users are going to be using. So that's my hope, but again, let's see how this goes. Now, looking at the code over here, we have two components. We're going to go through each component one by one, and let's first start with this main component here. So this is our component here, and this has one state variable here at the top. This is the activity count. It's a number state variable, and it gets its initial value as 0. Then we have a function here, track event, which takes in an event name, which is a string as an argument, and then we'll simply console log the actual event name, and also importantly, the activity count over here, which is our state variable. Then we have a useEffect over here, which inside of it creates an interval using the setInterval function. Inside of it, we'll call track event. So we're going to track a user activity event, right? And then we're going to increment the activity count by 1, and that's going to happen every single tick of this interval, which runs every 3 seconds. And then as the cleanup function of the effect, we're simply going to clear the interval to not have any memory leaks. Now, here's the thing. This code here, this example is obviously very simplified, right? This is for the sake of the video to not overwhelm the video with all of this complexity. Now, although this code here is simplified, right? And you wouldn't typically see exactly something like this in a real application, it is meant to actually represent something that you would see in an application. Like you wouldn't see an activity count state variable with a number and then the track event function that simply just console logs, right? You would typically see this being sent to like an actual analytic service, and this activity count, instead of being a number, maybe is some more structured data that actually has something that we actually want to track. So when I'm talking about this, please try not to get distracted about the simplicity of the code and try to use your imagination a little bit as to how we would actually use this in a real application. And in our case, for the simple example, this activity count here is simply tracking the amount of times, the amount of ticks that we actually tracked this event over here, right? So you can really think of it as how long the user has been on this page, how many ticks, right? How many units of 3 seconds has the user been on this page? Because as soon as the user leaves the page, right, leaves the component, we're going to clear the interval and then this will no longer tick. Cool. So now that we understand that, let's now look at this dependency array over here. Now, first of all, before I say anything, do you think that there's anything wrong with this dependency array here? Do you think that there's anything wrong with this code over here? Are we having a bug currently or are we not? Leave a comment down below. I would love to know. Now, of course, the answer is that we do. We currently have a bug. If I hover over here over this dependency array, ESLint is telling us that we have a missing dependency, track event. ESLint is telling us that, hey, you're using track event here, which is a reactive value, right? It's a function that is defined inside of a component, so that makes it reactive. You're using something that is reactive inside of the useEffect, but you haven't provided that dependency in the dependency array of the useEffect. And here's the thing, ESLint is right? This is correct. We do have a missing dependency because the rule is in React that everything that you use inside of the body of the useEffect, anything that is reactive that you use inside of its body has to always go in the dependency array of useEffect. And this is a rule. Now, I can already see some of you writing in the comments right now that this is actually not a strict rule. This is completely optional. And even having ESLint in general is optional. And we can just ignore this and not provide track event here in the dependency array. And to that, I'm going to say that you are wrong. And here is proof. So I think that a lot of you think that this is my own made up rule, that I just created this, but it's actually not. This is an official React rule. If I go here to the react.dev, right, the official React docs, you can't get any more official than that. I go here on the useEffect page, which is this one here, and you go to the specifying reactive dependency section, you can see here clearly it says, notice that you can't choose the dependencies of your effect. Every reactive value used by your effects code must be declared as a dependency. This is the rule. This is in the official React documentation. Again, it's not my rule. This is React. And so I generally don't understand when developers tell me, and they tell me this with such high confidence, by the way, that it's completely optional. Like it's not. It's officially in the React documentation. Yes, sure, React is not going to crash if you do that, right? It's not, and maybe that's a fault to React, but it's listed officially in the React documentation. So why would you willingly ignore something that the library that you're using is actually telling you to do? I genuinely don't understand that. Because, okay, if this was my rule that I just made up, fine. You can disagree with me. I don't care. I can't really force you. But going against React, that doesn't really make sense. And the only person that is losing is you, and then the people that are working with you, and ultimately the users that are using your application. And you can even see it here that they actually went and showed you an example of what not to do. So if I scroll down here, you have an example of the way that you shouldn't do things. This is an empty dependency array, and you can see here a red circle. By the way, if you don't know what a red circle is, it means no. It means this is not good. It means don't do this. A green check mark means do this, right? Everything that is used inside of the effect here has to go in the dependency array. I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a rant. I'm just very passionate about this because it annoys me when developers are telling me that this is optional when it's clearly not. Now, before we continue with the rest of this video, I just want to take a very quick moment to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Savala. Savala is a platform that you can use to deploy and host your applications. You can really think of it like the best of Vercel, Railway, Fly.io, all under one platform. What's really cool about Savala is how easy they make it to deploy your code, right? Your applications. You can have your application on GitHub, on GitLab, on Bitbucket, or even if it's a simple Docker image, you can just deploy it on Savala and it runs on the robust and secure Kubernetes network. And Savala supports not just JavaScript. You can pretty much deploy any type of application, whether it's Go, Python, PHP, any framework that you're using like Nuxt, Remix, Gatsby, Express, and so on. If you have it, you can be sure that Savala can deploy it. Savala has 25 data centers all across the globe, so no matter where your users are or where you want to deploy your application from, you can do it on Savala. And they also integrate really nicely with Cloudflare's Edge Delivery Network to serve your static content or even your static websites. You can also deploy databases, right? Which, let's face it, every application pretty much always needs a database, and they support the most popular ones like Postgres, MariaDB, MySQL. And you can also deploy object storage, right? S3 compatible storage to store all of your data that your users might need. Now, when it comes to pricing and limits, I think this is Savala's biggest strength because they literally have no artificial limits. You can have unlimited users, unlimited resources, unlimited traffic, and their pricing model is super simple, super transparent. You only pay for what you use, and you never get any surprise bills or any hidden fees. And because Savala's infrastructure is running on a Kubernetes network that is backed by Kinsta, it is fully security compliant with all of these certifications over here. To try everything that Savala has to offer, you can click the first link in the description, and if you do that, you're also going to get $50 in free credit to deploy to any application that you want. Thank you once again to Savala for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to talking about useEffect in React. Okay, so now that we understand that and we can agree that everything that we use inside of the useEffect has to go in the dependency array, let's look at what happens when you don't do that to really understand why this is the case. Because it's one thing to read it in the React documentation, but I really want you you to understand why, because there is a genuine valid reason for this. So let's look at how this code currently behaves with an empty dependency array. Now, I want to remind you that this track event function here is trying to track an analytics event with the event name, but also the value of activity count. And the important thing here is when we call track event, we want to have the updated value of activity count. So how many times we've incremented it here, we want to track it here every single time that we track that event. Now, because we provided here an empty dependency array, what's happening here is that on the initial mount of this component, right, this useEffect is going to run right after the first render. It's going to create this interval here, which is every 3 seconds going to call track event and then increment the activity count. And then that's it, right? We have an empty dependency array. So this useEffect is never going to re-render and is never going to run this cleanup function here until the component actually unmounts. Then it's going to clear it and then we're going to be done. But during the life cycle of the component here, this interval here only gets created once. And in React, when you create an interval, you're basically locking or freezing, right, the actual functions and their values, so the values that the functions reference, at the point in time that the actual interval was created. So our point in time is actually the initial render of the component when the component mounted. So on that initial render, activity count is 0. This track event function here gets created with a value of activity count 0. And then we put that inside of the interval over here. And this interval is going to run over and over again every 3 seconds. But because we have an empty dependency array here, every single time that we call this track event function here, we're always going to be calling it with a activity count value of 0. And this is the thing, this is how React works. And this is what we call a stale value, a stale closure, right? You're calling a function with a stale value because you haven't followed the rules in React. You haven't provided track event inside of the dependency array of the useEffect. And so every single time that this activity count changes or this track event function changes, your effect is not getting recreated and you keep running the same effect with the outdated values, which is obviously a bug, right? If you're a product person, right, if you really want to track how long this activity count has ticked, it's not going to work. You're always going to track 0. And this is a very real fundamental bug and you can't explain it otherwise. And so that's why this rule exists. It's not just some rule that we made up or like React made up. There's a specific reason for this rule and it's because of how React actually works. And so the solution, the way that you fix that is, again, you pass everything that you use inside of the body of the effect in the dependency array of the effect. So here we're going to have to pass track event over here, and that's it. We're not going to pass set activity count because although this is a function that is defined, created inside of the component, the state updater function from useState is not reactive, and you don't have to provide it in the dependency array because React kind of does some magic behind the scenes to make this not reactive. So that's fine, but this track event function, because you created it inside of the effect here, inside of the component, has to go inside of the effect. Now, as you can see here, we fixed our error here. There's nothing that ESLint is telling us that we're doing wrong, but now we have a new error here in this track event function telling us that this track event here is going to make the dependencies of useEffect essentially run on every render because the function gets recreated on every single render, right? Functions that you create in React are reactive. They're different from render to render. They have a different reference. And so this is going to trigger this useEffect to run on every single render. Now, in my case specifically, I'm running the React compiler on this application. So this is actually not going to happen. This track event function here is memoized behind the scenes, but ESLint here is a little bit outdated. So it thinks that it's not, but it actually is. But if you're not using the React compiler, here's what you can do to actually solve this. That also illustrates a little bit better why you want to provide the track event function inside of the dependency array over here. So usually when you have a situation like this, you can take the function here, remove it from the component and just define it inside of the effect. What this is going to make it is, so if this function is defined inside of the effect, it cannot be a dependency, right? Because dependencies is only things that are outside of the effect. Now, as you can see here, we have now another error. There's no more track event, so we have to remove it. But now we still have a ESLint error here. It's telling us that we have a missing dependency. Now it's activity count, because that's really the main problem here. It wasn't really this track event function. It was our outdated or stale value of activity count. That was the issue. And now it's a lot more clear if we define the function here. We can clearly see that we're depending on activity count in this useEffect. And that's why we have to provide here activity count in the dependency array of this effect, right? So this is the correct way to use useEffect and to use the dependency arrays. And that's why you have ESLint, right? ESLint was here to tell me, hey, I forgot to actually put activity count. And let me actually do a little experiment here. Let me go back, right? Let me put insert the function as we had it here. Let's go back to our initial state, and let me come here in my ESLint config, and let me disable the React exhaustive depths rule just to see how this looks like if you don't have ESLint enabled and why you want to have ESLint. So I'm going to do React hooks, exhaustive depths, and instead of error here, I'm going to do off, and I'm just going to close it here. And now you're going to see we no longer have any errors in our component. And this is unfortunately the state of a lot of React applications that I see out there in the real world. So currently with this code, we still have the same very real bug that we had initially, right? Every single time that we call track event here, we're going to call it with an outdated, a stale value of activity count. The only difference is that we're not aware of it, right? ESLint is not telling us, and if we're not experienced enough with React, we won't catch this and we will ship this to production and we will have a bug. Now, maybe you are experienced enough, right? Maybe you can think about this as you're writing this code, and maybe you see that, oh, we're using this track event function here. Oh, right, we should provide it in the dependency array of useEffect. And so maybe you think that, and you're like, okay, let's provide it here. Great, you provide it here, but now you have another error, right? Again, ESLint is not telling you anything, right? But now you have another error, which is this track event function, if it's not memoized, if you're not using the React compiler, is going to cause this useEffect to run over and over again unnecessarily. But maybe you catch that as well. Maybe you're like, oh, right, I shouldn't do this. Let's follow the best practices. Let's take this track event function here. Let's put it inside of the body of the effect. And then you're like, great, I no longer need to provide this here inside of the dependency array. We are all good. Except that you're not. You now forgot that you have to provide activity count in the dependency array. And again, there's no ESLint to tell you. And this is very easy to forget because remember, this is a very simplified example. In a real application, you would have usually more state variables, more functions, right? The functions would come maybe not from the same component, from another component, from props or whatever, and you would have more use effects. So how likely is it that you're going to catch every single instance of your code, or even catch it as you're refactoring the code? As you can see here, hopefully that's very hard. And even worse, what if it's some other developer that maybe did this? Maybe you didn't catch it, right? And maybe some other developer is like, oh, we shouldn't really do this. So they do this, and then they forget, right, to add this activity here. And now you're back to square one. Now you're back with the same exact bug that you had before, if you don't catch it. And so that's why you always want to have ESLint. ESLint is not some optional thing that we just add to make our lives harder when building React applications. It doesn't make sense. ESLint is there to make sure that we catch things that we would have otherwise missed, right? ESLint is an automated tool. It scans your entire project and it catches these things for you. And here it's telling you, you have a missing dependency activity count. So go ahead and add it so that you don't have any bugs inside of your application. Okay, great. Hopefully we now understand this. Hopefully we can all agree with this. Please leave me a comment down below if you understand, if you agree with this, because all that I see in my comments is the other way, that people don't understand, that people don't agree, and I'm losing my sanity a little bit here. So I want to see those of you that understand, please leave me comments just to save me from going crazy. Now let's look at this component here, because I want to show you what you can do if you really don't want to, and importantly, you don't need to actually provide the function in the dependency array of useEffect. So here what we have is we have this other component here. Again, simplified example for the sake of the video. This one takes in a function from props on init, so we don't actually even see the function itself. And this, we're basically only supposed to run this on init function once on mount initially as the component mounts, right? This is kind of the initialization function, so it's only meant to be run once. And so here in this case, an empty dependency array actually makes sense. We don't want this function here to run over and over again, even if on init changes for whatever reason. Technically, on init shouldn't change because it's an initialization function. It's not meant to run over and over again. Now, of course, again, here we have an actual problem, right? The same problem, a missing dependency. ESLint is telling us that we have on init here and that we need to provide it in the dependency array of useEffect because, again, that is the rule. But sometimes you don't want to do this, and doing this is actually not what you want to do and will not produce the result that you're expecting. And here's where this is actually a little bit React's fault, because React is not making it obvious and certainly not making it easy for you to really realize that you shouldn't be doing this. It's very easy, it's very tempting to just do this over here, right? And then even ignore this ESLint error, right? Just disable this line here because you know better, right? And although this works, and although this is going to achieve exactly what you expect, and trust me, I've been here, I've done this many times in my applications as I was learning, this is not a good habit to develop, because if you're doing it here, if you're disabling ESLint, again, you're going to have the same problems here. You're going to do it elsewhere in your application, and you are going to make a mistake, you are going to forget something, and you will introduce a bug. That is why I'm so adamant that you should never do this and there are better solutions. So React finally acknowledged that this was a real problem and they actually provided us a very real solution to not have to provide on init here in the dependency array of the effect. And that is to use the new useEffect event hook that just got introduced by React. Now, I already have a video on useEffect event. You can go and watch that if you want. So I'm not going to go over the hook here, but I will show you how you fix this. You come here and you create an effect event. So here we're going to do on init event. And I'm going to make it equal to useEffect event. Import this. This is only available on React 19.2. And I'm going to pass here on init just like this. And then call the event here. And here, I'm not going to provide it in dependency array because effect events, although they are reactive, again, React doesn't make this easy. It makes it a little bit confusing sometimes. Even though they are technically reactive, they don't have to be provided in dependency array. That's the whole reason why this hook was created in the first place. Now, I'm still getting an ESLint error here, right? With the same thing, missing dependency. That's because I haven't updated my ESLint already with the useEffect event. It's still relatively new. So ignore that. In this case, ESLint is actually wrong. And I understand the irony of this. Like, ignore this. ESLint is wrong. This is the only case where I'm telling you to, just because ESLint in my case hasn't been updated yet to be aware of how useEffect event actually works. Like, I wouldn't understand a developer who, instead of doing this, right, which again is super simple, you create an effect event, it's very clear, you have useEffect in the name here, so you know they go together, and then you don't provide it in the dependency array. This is the official way of solving this, and this is very simple. As opposed to coming here and again, disabling ESLint, right, introducing all of these bugs, right, making all of this messy code, and also going against what React is officially telling you to do, right? The authors of the library that you're using are telling you to do something. You're going against that. You're introducing all of these bugs. Why? When there's now an official solution that's simple to just do it. Like, why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. And hopefully after this video now, if you were thinking that in the past, if you were doing this in the past, like I was, again, I was a victim of this too, hopefully now you know better and hopefully you can change your ways and use the official safe recommendation from React, because ultimately that's going to make you a better developer. That's going to make the team that's working with you a better developer. And that's going to make the general React community better developers, which means that we're going to ship applications with less bugs. So that's really my hope for this video. I hope that I was able to convince at least some of you, right? Because again, I can't convince everyone. Even though I've showed this to you now, there's still people that are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. I can't force you. At this point, it's on you. But for the rest of you, I hope that we can finally put this issue to rest, finally understand and agree on how we should be using useEffect, how we should be using dependency arrays, useEffect event, and move on to finally please ship and build features for the actual users that are using our applications. So that's it. That's all that I have for this video. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. My name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.